This is a better time to be alive by far. Anybody who says they want to set the clock back, that's an ahistorical view.
So what will be the future of and what should be the future of billionaire and politician friendship? I'm going to subject you to some AI questions and how nervous should we really be? But where will the jobs come from?
We weren't born to do jobs.
In a world of turmoil, do you view India as relatively stable as a country?
If India can stay on this, 2047 plan, that's not just beneficial to India, it's beneficial to the whole world.
How would you remain optimistic?
The fact that I think innovation can solve every problem. Other people can make fun of me, I can make fun of myself.
A very warm welcome to other guest this evening, Bill Gates.
I think Mr. Gates and I were taking a while to decide who's right of center and who's left of center. Bill Gates, very warm welcome to Express Adda. It's such an incredible moment for us. Thank you so much for being here. I have to tell you, I can't give an original introduction to you except for saying what I said to you the last time we met, which was just thank you, Thank you for your charity. Thank you for your mind. Thank you for just making the world a better place. I think we're all happier and we're all in a better place because of you. And thank you for your time. It's really rare and difficult to get people like you to do live interviews these days. So thank you so much. I think let's start from where we left off the last time we met, which was exactly 2 years ago in Delhi. The last time we spoke. And the last time we spoke, Mr. Gates, we were celebrating global cooperation. We said that global cooperation, you said that global cooperation is the reason we were able to defeat COVID. The world came together and fought that. 2 years later, global cooperation seems very, very difficult to achieve. Would you agree?
I think, we're going through a little bit of a period where the U.S. is trying to reconsider its role in global cooperation. And I think the U.S. eventually will circle back to a slightly more cooperative mode in terms of what it's doing. I would say that, forcing others to step up for some of these issues in the long run, is not a bad thing.
Okay.
And, my overwhelming feeling is still one of great optimism because despite the fact that the Ukraine war, the Middle East unrest, those things are creating waves and resources that should have gone to help the poorest are going into building, more war material, and that's just a net loss for humanity that we're having to raise these defense budgets. We'll see it pretty vividly, we're about to do a replenishment to raise money for the vaccine fund, which is one of the greatest things the foundation's been involved in, one of the great reasons why so much progress has been made on things like child mortality. So we're going to go through about a 5-year period where the actual funds for the poorest countries will be down. But because of accelerated innovation and because I do think this will come back around, I still am very optimistic.
I mean, it's incredible that you're optimistic. Every crisis, I think the most impossible ones, you have somehow found a way to solving, right? Like we have a problem of carbon dioxide, you founded a company which is able to absorb CO2 from the earth. We have a problem that the most used man-made material in the world is cement, which is extremely polluting, 8% of emissions. You have funded a company which makes green cement. Nuclear energy, you've found a way to do it safely. How do you remain optimistic? Because we are still headed towards a 2 degrees Celsius increase, right?
If you look at the progress of how many people do natural disasters kill, the scientists are arguing a little bit about how much climate change will raise frequency and intensity of storms. And, let's say that comes out negative, that there's some increase in frequency and some in intensity. It's less clear than you'd think. Even so, what we see is that in rich countries, the deaths from natural disasters goes down by 90% because you build things to deal with tornadoes. You build early warning systems, and so people get out. And so the fundamental goal that we still have is to grow the economy and accelerate innovation. That will mean that even as climate makes things more difficult, particularly for poor countries near the equator, the overall human condition is improving a lot. We won't achieve the 1.5 degrees. We're not even likely to achieve the 2.0 degrees. Right. But there's no cataclysm at 2.1 or 2.2. It's really the best we do will take those countries that did not cause the problem and avoid them having to face tough conditions. We do have a lot of innovation, not just in mitigation, but also in adaptation, where you can get crops that can deal with the extra heat capacity and, those warning systems that help you more productive crops so that even if you have a bad year, that you have savings and a buffer stock. So even climate, which is definitely on the list of problems we need to basically avoid, even there, because of this pace of innovation, we will stay at a level that should not be disastrous.
And does it surprise you that it's the developing countries that are actually doing much better than the developed countries in terms of what they promised to do for climate?
Well, the developing countries didn't promise to do much. That was very helpful. It's a shame that the goals of providing more energy and reducing emissions seem to have come into conflict with each other. In the near term, providing energy to poor countries is very, very beneficial, even if you're using hydrocarbons, natural gas, even coal to do that. And eventually, as we get solar plus storage or nuclear fission or fusion to be very low cost, and there's some great things going on. It doesn't come as quickly as we'd like. The storage miracle, there's different approaches that I'm investing in that, I think one will work. And nuclear fission has been way too expensive. Yeah. And so now we need a whole new generation there. And then fusion, well, it doesn't exist, but by the late 2030s, I think we'll have that as a low-cost solution.
So do you believe that the developing countries can do even more? Because the sense that we get, at least in India, is that we're doing pretty well. Yes, there's an argument that promises were not that high in the first place, but 50% renewable energy without subsidies by the year 2030 seems to be on track.
And that's a good thing. But carbon emissions from India will go up. I mean, the amount of energy that India needs, you're going to need 5 times the electricity capacity. Yeah. And that's it's fantastic. The sooner you get that, the better. Yeah. And to the degree we can minimize the carbon output, and that's why you're right. You're absolutely right. That renewable energy number is very impressive. China is the leader in installing renewable energy, and India must be very close to number 2 in that respect. And, time is on our side. The cost of solar, we're not at the bottom of the cost of solar. That will come down quite a bit. And so when do we outcompete coal? For developing countries, how much coal are they going to add in the next 10 years? And when does that number peak and start to come down? China, we'd all hoped that their coal usage would peak, but they, even though they're further along, they're continuing to add coal.
But we keep hearing about China and all the advancements they're doing with all kinds of green energy and just everything, even EVs. We keep talking about. Can you tell us a little bit about what is happening in China that we should be looking at or learning from? Or
China's been able to develop deep research by having very strong universities. And that's, happening in India. In some areas, electronics, batteries, solar generation, China's out in front. It's hard to be out in front. It's actually easier, as India's coming along to do cheap solar panels here, as you're doing cheap batteries here, you'll have the blueprint that they've laid out, and you'll, be able to match or do better what they do. But they really have been absolutely a pioneer. It's a real shame for the world that the U.S.-China tension means that the willingness, to access those goods is quite limited. And so, say electric cars, the tariffs are high enough that there just won't be many Chinese electric vehicles sold in the United States.
Is the American-Chinese tension and just America's retreat, if I can use the word retreat from just, helping the world, and not just America, I think even UK has reduced its aid significantly. Do you feel a lot of pressure, or do you feel more motivated to kind of do even more than you have been doing?
I've already committed to giving all my money away.
Yeah.
So when people say to me, oh, can you make up for the United States? The answer is no. I've already committed all my money to these global health issues. And, it's a very tough pitch to a donor to say, okay, these rich countries are giving less. Why don't you step up? And the numbers just don't work. Foreign aid, is about $240 billion per year. And if you take philanthropy and say how much philanthropy flows from rich countries to developing countries, it's not even 10% of that, and a reasonable percentage of that actually happens to be our foundation. A lot of philanthropy, which I love all philanthropy, but a lot of philanthropy stays in the country where the fortune was made. And, here in India, I understand that, there's still, all the incredible challenges. Maybe 10 or 15 years, I'll come here and say to Indian philanthropists, hey, you should give money to Africa. But
no.
I've got 10 or 15 years before I can keep a straight face and say that's, higher impact.
No, I mean, there's obviously a lighter comment, but can you tell us a bit about what you envision as India's role in the world now? I mean, with all that's happened, with developing world's retreat.
Well, as I say, I think those aid numbers will go back up. And so I don't take it as a given that, take this UK cut from 0.5 to 0.3. They felt there was acute pressure to raise their defense budget. They still have a commitment to go back and to hit 0.7. And, if you believe like I do that AI is going to increase productivity, increase economic growth, I hope that means that a country like the UK, as they experience those benefits, that they have the budgetary room to go back and say, it's less than 1% of their government budget. And that, when I go to governments, I say, are you willing to spend 1% as a rich country to help the poorest countries in the world? And I don't see any reason why basic human morality and sympathy has been repealed so that we can't achieve that. When you ask voters, they often think 5 or 10% are going, and you say, okay, what should it be? They say, 2%. We say, okay, that would be, more than a doubling. Let's do it. Partly because they don't know the budget. They actually think that it's very large. India, the best example of India's role in helping other countries is probably the digital public infrastructure. There's a ton of people in India who did brilliant work. The government, starting with the Prime Minister, supported that work. And it's a phenomenal thing, whether you look at banking or government benefits being transferred or financial overhead, or a template that's allowed of startups to build services on top of that, insurance and, stock trading and you name it. Every time I'm here, I meet a dozen more companies, and I'd say there's an acceleration. Now India is actually contributing. It's been true of vaccines since the turn of the century.
Yeah.
Serum, Bharat, BioE, people that the Gates Foundation has helped to fund and partner with in a pretty deep way. They make over 60% of the world's vaccines
Right.
come from those companies. But we haven't had that many other examples. Now we're seeing in diagnostics, in pioneering use of AI, in advanced agriculture, biofertilizer, better seeds, animal vaccines, animal genetics. We're seeing that India is going to be a significant source of innovation that helps solve these problems domestically. And, the Gates Foundation will have a role like in DPI where we help fund other countries to develop the expertise to come and do what, it's often called South-South partnership. It's my fourth day here. I'm going away just super pleased that this concept of more and more of the innovation coming from India, it's no exaggeration. It's going even faster than I expected.
That's wonderful. And is there a particular reason you chose India to have your global board meet?
Well, India's been our biggest foundation office outside the United States. And if you look at, just raw numbers in terms of children's lives saved, where we've, been a partner with the government and others in doing that, India's, where we've had our greatest success.
I see.
A third as many children die before the age of 5 today than at the turn of the century. And,
And you work closely with the government for that.
Yeah, we founded a thing called Gavi that buys vaccines.
Yes.
We funded new vaccines almost entirely here in India that are very, very low cost so that you can get them out. Like Rajban did a rotavirus vaccine that, Bharat came in and made, a low price, and that's now, saving literally that one vaccine, millions of lives. So partly because of the new things developing here, and if you don't come to the country and see the DPI stuff in action, see a country whose R&D budget is going up by significant amounts, and a lot of that R&D will be focused on things like nutrition or agricultural productivity. So we'll be partnering more even on the R&D side, not just on the delivery side. In the past, we were a very high percentage of the world's research on nutrition. Now we have the Indian government, because of the increased wealth and that as a priority. Several of those nutrition studies are done together, and we're getting really great results. So of all the places to come and see and to get a hopeful view in a time of some turmoil, this is a great place to be. And so the board went to Bangalore. They, of course, were in New Delhi. They just finished a couple days up in Lucknow to see a lot of what's going on.
You said in a world of turmoil, do you view India as relatively stable as a country? A place of stability?
India's been fiscally responsible enough that, although you have debts and loans, you're not that dependent on external sources. So it's been great. Although historically, India was a meaningful aid recipient, as you've grown your economy, you've graduated by and large. And so there are still catalytic things that go on. Our foundation has spent over $4 billion of grants here, and we're going to keep doing that, for decades to come, but it'll shift more from funding delivery. We'll still do some, but to funding innovation, often jointly with the government and with the incredible group of philanthropists. So yes, India is a little bit not pulled into this turmoil the U.S. is involved in.
Just tell us a little bit about how exactly the government and the foundation work together, because I think it's in this turmoil more so than before, it seems to be like a global trend where there is a certain skepticism to foreign foundations. You are loved by every state government, no matter who's in power, by central government. You're an exception to this. But but not just in India. I see in many parts of the world, there is a certain hesitation in dealing with foreign foundations. Are you seeing that, and why are you the exception to that?
Well, the Indian government has very aggressive goals for reducing childhood death, for agricultural productivity, for improving education. And so the Gates Foundation doesn't come to India trying to change your goals. We come and say, we think a cheap rotavirus vaccine or a pneumococcus vaccine or a $2 TB diagnostic. Now, the diagnostic industry has gone from almost nothing in India, before the pandemic, quite small, to now there's quite a number of really good companies. And, so we're going after really aggressive goals like that cheap TB diagnostic. I have no doubt it's going to be one of our partners here. I was with the Chief Minister of Maharashtra today, and, in parts of this state, even though this state is incredibly well off, there's still pockets of malaria. But, we had our top malaria person in talking about, okay, how do we work with this state? What's going on in the tribal areas, what's going on in the urban areas, which new tools are going to come along to get an eradication, starting with this state, but eventually, the country. Some of those tools also apply to dengue. So all of these insect-transmitted diseases, it's an exciting time. So because we're a very technical organization, and hopefully saving children's lives isn't controversial.
No.
Or getting the cost of vaccines down. I think some foundations that are really trying to be helpful, people are wary of. So maybe that wariness is a little bit higher than it should be. But because we're technical and following the government's goals, we're not saying you should have different priorities.
And the government wouldn't take your advice on what the goals should be.
I don't know if they would. I haven't tried that.
You mentioned Indian philanthropists have been a big support and partner, and you also mentioned it's a difficult world right now, as a world in an uncertain world is how you phrased it, I think. Is it easier to get philanthropy in an uncertain world because there is more empathy given that the world is uncertain, or is it more difficult because you want to hold on to and go to shore for safety?
Well, if the world was absolutely in turmoil, like World War I, World War II, I think it'd be very hard to raise money philanthropically because people would be pulling in. The world is getting richer. Less children are dying today by a factor of 2. I mean, that's just an incredible thing. People are living longer. Women are being treated better. We're all so headline oriented and we're so focused on the problems. This is a better time to be alive by far. Anybody who says they want to set the clock back, that's an ahistorical view. We've added, humans over the last 200 years have doubled the average lifespan. The rate of literacy has gone from 5% to 90%. So it's hard for people to step back. Even take a problem like obesity. We now have a class of drugs. It's early days, they're still too expensive, and we need to do things with them. They actually, go off patent, and so, I'll bet some of our partners here in India will make those things, very, very broadly available, like was done with vaccines or HIV medicines. And, it's hard to overstate, solving that problem, even for India, is a big thing, even more so for the United States.
Today a $1 trillion company doesn't seem big enough. I mean, you're talking, the companies are crossing $1 billion valuation, talking $3 trillion, and you just feel like you want to hold on to everything you can for growth. You want to kind of keep, you not get this? You not get this when you talk to philanthropists? I mean, do they always say, okay, I've hit $1 billion, so now I can give half of it, or is that feeling of enough coming more than it was earlier?
Well, I think the mindset of people who make their money from technology, they a little bit more understand they're not going to pass the company to their children. And some of them think, okay, if they did pass that money to their children, maybe it wouldn't even be the best thing. And so, although there's tons of amazing philanthropists who are not in the tech sector, part of the reason it's grown so much is that the basic expectation in the tech sector is pretty high. Azim Premji, has been unbelievably generous. I think everyone that falls into line and does that, it helps, sort of set the norm
Right.
For
Yeah.
other people. So philanthropy's on a big climb, and people are more strategic in their philanthropy. More willing to think, okay, what is the pilot program that maybe the government could scale, or what is the innovation that's missing
Right.
that if I funded it, would have a incredibly disproportionate impact.
So, Mr. Gates, we're going to try and play a short game with you, rapid fire. So
Okay.
try to keep the answers a little bit short. So I'm going to give you a topic. You have to tell me what you think will be the future of this and what should be the future of.
Okay.
So what will be the future of and what should be the future of billionaire and politician friendships?
Politicians have historically hung out with Franklin Roosevelt, was a very equity-oriented president, did brilliant things. He hung out with rich people. He hung out with people who were creating companies and saw problems and things like that. So I don't think there's some sin. You can, if you're not careful, you can get, a level of corruption or, misset the priorities of the country. But hearing from business people about what's going to happen and what would let them move faster, that's an important dialogue. When I started Microsoft, I was proud that I had no office in Washington, D.C., and I learned to regret that. That was a mistake.
Okay, what will be the future of and what should be the future of family?
I'm not sure that changes all that much.
So I'll tell you why I asked this question, because in your book, Source Code, you gave a beautiful story. You said that the best code that you have ever written in your life was the first code that you wrote. And you wrote that code when you were walking, you wandered on a path, a snowy path, and you wrote code in your mind. And that is still date the best code you've ever written. With all the technology now in everybody's hands, it's tougher and tougher to expect children to wander into these stray paths and probably come up with that kind of code. So how does a parent, give children these snowy path moments that happen for you?
In those days in the United States, you could go out to play and your parents wouldn't necessarily know where you were. You could go out on hikes.
Right.
Today, I don't know about India, but today in the United States, this concern that, okay, it would be even a little bit unsafe, that you're very protective of your kids. And now there's, I think, a recognition that that's probably gone too far, that letting kids hang out with kids, make mistakes, maybe even, get themselves in a little bit of a mess. I think I benefited from that.
Okay, what will be the future of, what should be the future of truth?
Well, I was naive in thinking that the arrival of the internet would be the most wonderful day for truth, that, you could go and somebody would tell you something that was going on and you could look up and say, no, that's wrong. We looked, here's the court filing, here's the statistics. It was interesting to read Harari's recent book, Nexus, where he says, and I'm sure he's right, that when the printing press was invented, the most popular books were about how to find and kill witches. And so that was the societal use of this, fundamental thing that now we look back on it, we say, yes, the printing press, what a fantastic thing. So the idea that for meaningful periods of time will take an advance and it'll actually go against human interest, I found that fascinating. But until social networking came along and it created a sense of jealousy and concern, I always thought that technology was an unadulterated good. In those early days, they'd say, what's wrong with technology? The answer was that it wasn't getting to all the kids. It was the so-called digital divide, that we needed to have everyone have access.
Okay, what will be the future of the relationship between Silicon Valley and Washington, D.C.?
Well, politicians are going to have a tough time with AI. They're not that hands-on, and it's advancing at a pretty quick rate. The 2024 election, AI was not part of the debate. It wasn't like, okay, this one has good AI policies and this one doesn't, or any contrast. And I was a little surprised at that. But I would predict that by 2028, our next presidential election, that policies around AI, how you shape it in a good way, will be a primary topic,
Right.
one of the three most important topics, because people will be starting to see not only the white collar AI, but the blue collar
Yeah.
AI, which involves robotics, which today is very limited, but the number of people working on that, the advances in that, guarantee, if it's not 2028, by 2032, the job market will already be starting to change.
So, good or bad, the relationship between Silicon Valley and DC?
I'll say good, just
Okay.
because I like to say nice things. Yeah.
Okay, the future of brand India.
Not many people are offended by India. You meet great Indians all over the world. A lot of people don't know much about India. They should come more, learn more, lots of great things they could do. If India can stay on the path, this, 2047 plan,
Right.
that's just not just beneficial to India, it's beneficial to the whole world. And the fact that you have, 20% of humanity that runs, semi-chaotic, but truly democratic elections and works out all the priorities. And, there's more money for health, there's more money for education. The metrics about, where are we falling short? What are the aspirational districts where we need to do better? The fact that the competition really is in good governance, not Group A is going to get advantaged over Group B.
Yeah.
Which if you go back far enough in Indian politics, there was a lot of, Group A is going to be advantaged over Group
Sure.
B. But as voters, enough voters are voting, hey, is this guy really going to run the country, including things like health, well enough, that's created a very positive dynamic that you're competing in good governance.
Fantastic. Okay, the future of nationalism.
Nationalism is often gets extreme in a scary form. If you go to the Olympics, you see nationalism in this really benign form. Like in Paris, there was a great Olympics. I was lucky enough to spend time there. The French were so excited that their teams were actually doing pretty well and that, they had done a good job of hosting. And the whole atmosphere, and it was okay, when people get up and root for the USA thing, it's not really at the expense of other people. And, then you play those national anthems. Some of them are not as good as others, but that's nationalism in a really fine way. Nationalism at its most extreme leads to wars. And, there's no way to destroy value and lives more than wars. So we have to shape nationalism. In Africa, a lot of those countries, it's weird to say, but they don't have enough nationalism. When you say to somebody, are you a citizen of X? They'll say, not really, I'm a member of this tribe. And so it's almost like the extreme of Indian politics where when they go to vote, they're voting for their fellow tribe members, independent of how well they're going to run the primary healthcare system.
Your favorite innovation from India that can tackle a global problem?
Oh, I have to say DPI.
DPI, okay.
I mean, cheap vaccines, DPI, that's a hard choice for me.
Okay, which country do you see winning the chip wars? Is there one winner and one loser?
Well, as of today, Taiwan, in terms of making chip, is the winner.
Is there a loser?
The US is still where the most advanced chip designs are doing. But, it's going to be a pretty global industry because, you've got to give South Korea credit. They've done pretty well as well.
Is there a loser?
As long as the chips are flowing freely, if there was a war over Taiwan and all that capacity happened to be destroyed, the entire world would have a wild chip shortage for a period of time. There are some incredible innovations to make chips in a very different way than we do today.
Right.
And I fund several of those. Those are 5 to 10 years away. But the current machines, there may be much better ways to do that, but that won't help us in the near term.
Okay, so we know what excites you about your investment in OpenAI, but is there anything that scares you as a tech investor?
No, I mean, AI in general scares me because mankind's going to have to shape it. And it's a world, that will feel very, very different. So I worry about AI in general, but no, the people at OpenAI have done a good job. I've worked with Sam and Greg and the team there, and they're great.
Okay, if democracy was a human being sitting on a desktop using Microsoft XP right now, what do you think its status would be? Is democracy shutting down, hibernating, or preparing to upgrade?
Well, the people who do these ratings of how democratic countries are, after World War II, we saw a dramatic rise in that. And now we're actually seeing a slight decline. And I find that concerning because we are better off. I mean, we are absolutely way, 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 way better off. And so not only did that decline of democracy, but even the trust in institutions or the degree of polarization.
Yeah.
I'm not a social scientist or a politician, but the degree of polarization we have in the US, I'm hoping we can reverse that. And the trust in institutions, we've got to go back and work on that. It's a strange world where the US that elects their politicians, 8% of them think they're doing a good job, and China that doesn't elect their politicians, 80% think they're doing a good job. That's not the way it's supposed to work.
Right. Okay, so a 100-year-old legacy newspaper or the 25-year-old influencer, who do you prefer engaging with?
Well, I think newspapers.
Thank you.
I'm very sad that the business model of newspapers, because we don't have the classifieds anymore, that it's under threat. If you look in the US, who keeps local government honest? It was the newspapers. They did a fantastic job. And the idea that today, we have such a limited number of newspapers that can really do investigative reporting. Even at the national level, it's gone down. And at the local level, it's dramatically gone down. And I don't know how to fill that vacuum. I hope some philanthropists decide that's an area that they work on, because that has played, it's a piece of the democratic system that's necessary.
Math phobia. Phobia for math. Math phobia. Is there a solution for math phobia?
That people don't like math?
Yeah.
Oh, AI tutors.
Okay. E-waste.
Yeah, it's not that big of a problem. I mean,
with all the EVs and the batteries coming with it, it's not a big problem?
We'll recycle those. I mean, there's some incredible companies.
Okay.
The lithium and a few of the other things, the cobalt, are valuable enough that there's a couple of techniques. I'm a funder of a company called Redwood. I think we'll be fine.
Okay, great. Teacher shortages.
AI tutors.
Okay. All right. If you were to look 10 years ahead, Mr. Gates, which economy would you bet on for higher returns? US, China, or India?
Well, returns if you're saying, whose stock market is undervalued, the Indian stock market is already anticipating some of the growth. I think India, it's great to be in a place where the argument is, will the growth be 5% or 10%? And I think, it's very likely. I doubt it'll get much above 10, and, I don't think it'll get much below 5. And that's an incredible period of time. Great opportunities. The government will have more money to spend on healthcare and education because of that economic growth. So India's in a great spot. If you're really rich like the United States, you don't get 5% growth rates. So, we're super happy if we get, 2.5%, 3%. And because of AI, we might well achieve that.
Okay, if you were to diversify a small portion of your portfolio today outside of the US dollar, would you choose euro, crypto, gold, or Chinese yuan?
I wouldn't choose crypto.
Yeah. That was an easy option.
I'm a well-known skeptic of pure mania-driven assets. Gold, it's up at 3,000 an ounce. It's, I missed that run.
Okay.
So, the euro's not going to go up or down a whole ton. I'm not sure. I mean, I think a basket of equities in general is your best long-term. Ideally, a globally balanced basket of equities.
And just 30 seconds, are you There are reports that you are scaling back on climate change. Is that right or wrong?
No, I'm not. The thing I scaled back is I had about 50 people working on climate policy. And in the current situation, I chose to significantly reduce the size of that group. But my overall spending on climate change continues to go up. And it's really the innovation pathway, which I describe as negative green premiums, that you can buy clean cement cheaper than dirty cement and steel and meat and everything else.
Is there one sort of conspiracy theory about you that makes you laugh?
The fact that I think innovation can solve every problem. Other people can make fun of me, I can make fun of myself. So that is funny.
Super. One of the things that's causing uncertainty, and I think generally, fluttering of hearts with business people is AI. I honestly don't have very original questions, but I've never got good answers to. So I'm going to subject you to some AI questions. And I think the first one is exactly that, is, how nervous should we really be? I mean, in this the old argument of humanity versus technology, how is that going to play out?
Well, this is a deeply, deeply profound advance that at some point will change life, all activities, quite a bit. The revolution that I was part of was taking computing from being very expensive to being essentially free. When I was young, if I heard there was a computer that was available at night, I would go, even break in and try to get access. I mean, computers were just so scarce. Now what we have is intelligence, which is scarce. Brilliant doctors, brilliant engineers, even people to make support phone calls, telesales phone calls. Intelligence is scarce. AIs are able to solve unbelievably complex problems today. Not all of them, but a lot of them. They're already superhuman. But because they're not perfectly reliable, people are hesitating, okay, where should we apply these things? I think done properly, this stuff is going to roll out in areas like health and education super rapidly over the next couple of years. Whatever the time frame that the capabilities and the reliability is perfected, then you're in a world where inventing drugs or writing up proposals or making telesales calls, it's just software. That intelligence will be free. And so you go from a shortage of teachers, a shortage of doctors, to having as much doctor expertise as you want, as many, brilliant tutors that are, customized and personal and encouraging to your motivation. That's kind of
that's great, but where will the jobs come from then?
We weren't born to do jobs. I mean, jobs are an artifact of the shortage that, oh gosh, somebody better be a farmer. Okay, somebody better, drive those trucks around. And so it's actually very hard to imagine this future because the whole system of markets and pricing and, how you go about education, all of that is based on creating the human intelligence to provide a broad range of services. And so as you get away from that being a necessary thing, you get a lot more leisure time and you get almost a philosophical question of, okay.
The sense of purpose?
Yes. In my case, spent 70 years in the world of, shortages. It's hard to reprogram your brain to, this change.
There are 500 million people under the age of 25 in India who are getting education, who want to get educated, most of them, and will come out looking for jobs. And you believe that AI is not going to come in the way of that.
Society will be able to have a level of output, food, medical advice that won't require everybody to work like they do today. We'll have a choice. I mean, we can say that the machines shouldn't help with certain things. We can confine them to certain areas if we choose to. But the reason you think about jobs is because of the shortages.
Is India doing AI right? Or rather, how should India be doing AI right?
I think India's doing AI correctly. A lot of India's use of AI will be applying AI. Now, the state of the art in terms of these foundational models, so much of it is open source and available, and the techniques are so published that even though a lot of that great work is coming out of the US and China, nobody's really behind. I mean, you can take, the latest models, or maybe they're a few months behind on the benchmarks. Those things are out there, and you can take them and say, okay, I'm going to make sure Indian native languages are supported, or when Indian farmers want to talk about their crops, that the quality of the data and the understanding of the local dialect is really good. Or India can take and say, okay, we'll take this AI, and for our defense capabilities, we'll know it. Because it's totally available, it's not like anybody's behind. And so when I talk to people here, although there's some who want to contribute to the foundational pieces, most people are seeing the opportunity to take and apply AI into a particular domain.
And this whole, chasing the chips, to try and creating our own fabs here, is that something that we should be investing time and effort in?
Well, if India can be competitive, it's not worth subsidizing indefinitely a chip industry. I just don't think that's worthwhile. The US might decide it is simply because, if you need chips for some things and you're worried that you really angered everyone else so they won't give you their chips, you might have to think that way, and you've got enough money that you can consider spending on something like that. The reason India should get into chips is that they'll be able to be competitive. And initially, that's not in the cutting edge chips, but over time, India always gets up to the very cutting edge.
And you believe India can and will have the electricity to do all of this? Because with AI, I learned from, I think I saw him here, Mr. Patni, that every chat GPT search takes 10 iPhones of battery to give a result.
The total additional electricity load of all these AI activities could get as high as 10 to 15% of the world's electricity. So that's not as much as electric cars will use as we electrify that.
I see.
If we go to electric heat pumps, it's not as much electricity as that. If we take, say, cement and steel and we're using electricity for that, it's not as much electricity as that. It's a lot of electricity, but compared to, say, what India needs to add just for its basic economic growth to achieve its 2047 plan. So it is there, and these are buyers of electricity, many of which want to buy clean electricity. So if you say to them, hey, we're going to add a coal plant, they'll go, oops, maybe we should, fund more nuclear. And so the fact that these buyers are particularly willing to pay a bit of a green premium to be associated with clean energy, I don't see it as a huge setback in electrification. Also, the uncertainty about how much electricity we need to run AI systems is very unclear. The amount of electrical power or energy that the human brain uses to do its work is very modest. So today our AI models are about 10,000 times less efficient at cognition as the human brain. So evolution has provided an existence proof that there's a way to do these things without expending so much energy. Now, in the next 10 years, how much of that factor of 10,000 do we reduce? If that goes really well, then a lot of these people who are, projecting the gigantic data centers, that won't be necessary. Google's got to get at the front of this, Microsoft, a lot of companies racing to lead this next generation.
Knowing fully well that efficiencies will kick in and they might have overcapacity.
They might. Most industries, the car industry, after it got popular, got over capacity. Internet bandwidth, although later we were able to use it, we got an overbuild of those things. So it would actually, in the history of industries that are exploding in their first round of adoption, we generally get overcapacity. That is very typical. But it's like saying that the market will go down. You don't know when. Is that overcapacity 3 years from now? 10 years from now, 15 years from now.
And also the efficiency has come from not the old companies. The efficiency in operations have come from China.
No, that's a little bit. In general, most innovation comes from existing companies with gigantic R&D budgets. People notice when it's someone unexpected coming along. But, in the history of improving chips, Intel did most of the improvements. Now, when an upstart like an NVIDIA comes along, or, Intel's to some degree lost its way, that's very notable. But if you take innovation as a whole, including in AI,
the biggest guys.
The amount that happened inside Google, Microsoft, OpenAI is even better. Now, nobody saw these DeepSeek guys. Even in China, they're like, who's that guy?
Yeah.
This is not like some government-funded guy or some mainstream company. Now, the Alibaba models are also very good. The ByteDance models are very good. So even within China, DeepSeek is not all that unusual, but they did one very, very clever thing, and they showed everybody the clever thing they did. And so it's, how long were they ahead in the benchmarks? At least 2 weeks. Great, they might be ahead again. The speed of innovation and kind of the openness of the innovation, I've never seen anything like it. I mean, the numbers are just unbelievable.
Have you figured out an equation in your mind about what the ideal population of the world should be, or the ideal population of any country should be?
No, I think this comes down to the individual level, where people are going to make a decision about how many children they want on their own. And whenever that's been done on a tops-down basis, that's really an invasion of
but is there a given that, emissions go down if population goes down, but then economy doesn't grow if population goes down, and then you kind of encourage immigration, and then at some point that becomes a political issue. So population seems to be something which I don't think we've got a very firm... And, your a book that you recommended many years ago, Factfulness, by Hans Rosling, very clearly said that the more education you give, the less the population... I mean, the reproduction rate drops.
The issue of population will not be one of planetary capacity. We will, through innovation, we will have a population way, way below the maximum planetary capacity. So, that's not the thing that will determine population. It'll be determined by choices that people make. The clear trend is the richer a country becomes, the lower its fertility rate. And we have some extreme examples. South Korea's got a very low fertility rate. Even China, the drop in population, they are less population every year. Even India's growth isn't that large. There are parts of India where you have population shrinkage, more in the south generally, and then in the north. So you do grow, but the growth rate is really, really tiny. The U.S. is kind of a special case because the level of immigration, illegal and legal immigration, plays a big role in the fact that at least the current projection is that the U.S. won't shrink over the next 50 years. But immigration, you have to have a crystal ball for immigration to stay with that prediction.
So there's no ideal number in your mind as a percentage, or you're saying whatever happens, the world will absorb.
Yeah, no, I don't think I have a role to play in.
No, not role to play. Okay, but I think I get your point. That's not, population isn't a central concern right now.
Well, and the Gates Foundation, we do a lot in contraception, and so that if a family chooses to space their births or to limit the number of births they have, we make sure that those tools are available, so we're reducing the cost of various contraception things, but all, available for voluntary use.
So, founder of Cred, one of the wonderful financial startup companies that are,
Bill, it was amazing to listen to you. I have a more philosophical question. If energy becomes efficient and wealth is directly correlated to energy, can we expect the 1,000 trillion net worth of the world happening much faster than it did? It would have happened without AI and energy efficiency, that's one. And what have you felt about the concept of human intelligence or humans after discovering AI? Like, what is the Like, what's your view of humans now after AI has come?
Well, I'm a real optimist that either fission or fusion will provide energy at prices well below even today's solar, natural gas, or coal. And it has benefits in that it's constant energy, it's not weather dependent, it can be placed near to wherever the big energy loads are, and so it'll help globally. The question about how AI changes our humanity, I find that a important and fascinating question that there isn't that much that's written about. Harari's conclusion is that humanity isn't ready for AI, and we ought to put this thing to the side, work on getting along with each other, and then maybe open Pandora's box. If I could personally vote, say I had control over how fast AI advances take place, I might choose to slow it down. But there's nobody who has that vote. As Mustafa Suleiman wrote, the individual incentives, the company incentives, the country incentives make it very difficult to say, wait a minute, let's slow this thing down. So I don't see any prospect that we're going to slow it down. Then your question, becomes a great question that I hope economists, philosophers, even, people who think about religion, come along and say, okay, this is such a profound change. Let's, think about what value system we retain for this world of excess.
Okay, quick last question. There's a brilliant astrophysicist over there, Shravan Hanasoke, works at TIFR. If you can get a mic to him quickly, and Shravan, if I can ask you to keep your question a little short, because Mr. Gill being generous with his time.
Thank you for this. It's about climate change, which I am, deeply concerns me. I'm very heartened to hear that you think the 2-degree transition isn't so terrifying, but there's a sense of impending doom, right? I mean, extinctions, the reduction of the biosphere, et cetera, and the circulation, the collapse of various circulations are all, there's a critical threshold where that might happen. So that is a problem as we approach 2 degrees Celsius. So what do you see as the end game to remove the baseline carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? I mean, there are all these things that sip, they're just taking tiny amounts of carbon dioxide. How are we going to decarbonize the atmosphere?
There are a variety of techniques for carbon removal, some of which are potentially very, very inexpensive. I mean, today, when I go out, I spend $9 million a year to cancel out my carbon emissions, and that's bought at about $300 a ton. The best technologies today get you down to about $60 a ton, but there are approaches that may get as low as $1 a ton. And at that point, it becomes incredibly affordable for the world to pull that down. There are also techniques that people are reluctant to talk about, but where you reduce the warming through having particles, what's called solar radiation management. And if you're starting to see positive feedbacks in terms of the temperature. It's all about temperature. And there is some uncertainty about are there positive feedbacks having to do with ocean circulation, methane release, a variety of other things. Right now, we don't see those as super likely, but we have to admit there's a lot we don't know. Why did the ice sheets collapse as quickly as they did in the historical record? Are there interventions specifically aimed at stopping that? So I still list climate change as one of the great 5 problems, right up there with bioterrorism, managing AI, not having nuclear wars. I rate that as still a super important thing. But I don't think in the 2.5 degree regime that the likelihood that we'd have to deploy the SRM is there. I do think we should research that and have it available. And I do think pushing for those extremely low-cost carbon removal technologies, that is one of the most important things. And so I made sure Breakthrough and is funding that. And that would really change this picture. And so I'm sad that the current priority of climate change in the rich countries has gone down a lot as other short-term things are affecting them. And if you try to get voters to pay a lot for expensive things for climate change, and you often will get a different party elected who doesn't care about that. People care about climate change, but when you say you get to buy an expensive car or an expensive electric heat pump, then they don't care enough for that. And so innovation is the only way to square that circle.
Mr. Gates, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I'm sure I'm not the only one here who's feeling very privileged. Thank you so much. Thank you so
thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anand, for the fabulous session. May I now invite Raj Kamal Jha, Chief Editor, The Indian Express, to present a token of appreciation. This is the front page of Indian Express edition dated 28 October 1955. This happens to be Mr. Gates' birthday.
This is a better time to be alive by far.